Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. Could you start by telling me a little about yourself and your background as a freelancer?
Good morning, and thanks for having me. I'm a freelance graphic designer with about 5 years of experience working with a variety of clients from startups to established brands. I specialize in branding, logo design, and UI/UX design. I've also worked on some print projects and social media content, so my skill set is pretty diverse. I've always enjoyed the freedom freelancing offers, especially the opportunity to work on different types of projects.
That's great. What's your typical process for starting a new project? How do you ensure you meet client expectations?
When I start a new project, I usually begin with an in-depth consultation to understand the client's goals, their vision for the project, and the target audience. I ask lots of questions to clarify the project scope, budget, and timeline. Once I have all the necessary details, I move into the conceptual phase where I brainstorm ideas and provide initial sketches or concepts. After getting client feedback, I refine the design based on their input, and I always make sure they feel involved in the process to avoid miscommunication. I also set clear milestones to ensure that I stay on track and the client is happy with each stage of development.
Sounds like you have a solid workflow. Can you share a challenge you faced in your freelancing career and how you overcame it?
One challenge I've faced was managing client revisions. Sometimes clients don't have a clear idea of what they want, and that can lead to multiple rounds of revisions. In those situations, I've learned to set expectations early on by explaining the revision process and how many rounds of changes are included in the scope. I also make sure I get as much detailed feedback as possible, which helps me refine the design in fewer iterations. Another way I overcame this was by offering a fixed price for revisions beyond a certain point, which helped keep the process efficient.
That's a great way to handle revisions. How do you prioritize tasks when you have multiple clients or projects running at the same time?
I use a combination of time blocking and project management tools to stay organized. I usually start my day by reviewing my calendar and the tasks at hand. I prioritize based on deadlines, but I also make sure I leave some buffer time for any unexpected changes or urgent tasks. I use tools like Trello or Asana to keep track of each project's status, and I make sure to communicate with clients if anything is going to be delayed or needs adjusting. Flexibility is key, but organization is what keeps things running smoothly.
That sounds like an efficient approach. As a freelancer, you must manage your own marketing as well. How do you find new clients or market your services?
I get most of my clients through a combination of word of mouth, social media, and online freelance platforms like Upwork or Fiverr. I've also built a personal website where I showcase my portfolio and services. To build my network, I often attend industry events, webinars, or meetups to meet other creatives and potential clients. I've also found that maintaining a presence on Instagram and LinkedIn helps with visibility and attracting new leads. Once a client has worked with me, I always ask for referrals or testimonials, which can help bring in new business.
It seems like you found a good balance between digital and in-person networking. On that note, how do you handle situations when a project doesn't go as planned or you're not able to meet a deadline?
First and foremost, communication is key. If I know there's going to be an issue with a deadline, I inform the client as soon as possible. I always try to offer a solution, whether that's extending the deadline or adjusting the scope of work to meet the timeline. I've learned to be proactive about managing expectations rather than reactive. And if I make a mistake, I own up to it and do my best to resolve it quickly. Freelancers are only as good as their reputation, so being transparent and dependable is really important to me.
That's definitely a strong approach to client management. Last question. How do you stay motivated and productive when working independently?
Staying motivated can be a challenge, especially without a team or set work hours. I set clear goals for myself, both short-term and long-term, and celebrate the small wins along the way. I also make sure to take regular breaks to avoid burnout and keep my creativity flowing. When I'm in a slump, I find that stepping away from the project for a bit or doing something unrelated, like taking a walk or reading, helps me come back with fresh ideas. Having a flexible routine really helps keep things exciting, so I stay energized throughout the day.
That's a great mindset. How do you manage client expectations in terms of timelines and project scope?
Managing expectations is all about clear communication from the very start. I make sure the client understands what's feasible within their timeline and budget, and I'm upfront about what I can deliver. I always outline the scope of the project in a contract or agreement. This way, both of us are on the same page regarding deliverables, deadlines, and payment terms. If something changes along the way, I discuss it with the client and adjust the project scope or timeline accordingly. I think regular check-ins and updates are crucial to avoid any surprises later on.
I agree. Regular check-ins definitely help. Let's talk a little about money. Freelancers often have to set their own rates. How do you determine what to charge for your services?
Determining rates is definitely a balancing act. I take a few things into consideration: my level of expertise, the complexity of the project, and the market rate for similar services. I also think about how much time the project will take, and I factor that into my rate. For example, a logo design might cost a different amount than a complete brand overhaul or website redesign. I've also built in a bit of flexibility. If it's a long-term client or a particularly exciting project, I might offer a discount, or if the project is urgent, I'll add a rush fee. My goal is always to make sure my rates reflect the quality of work I provide, but also the value it brings to the client.
That sounds like a fair approach. Now, let's say you're working on a project, and suddenly the client goes silent or delays providing feedback. How do you handle that situation?
First, I try not to jump to conclusions. Sometimes clients get busy, so I'll give them a little time before following up. If I haven't heard from them after a reasonable period, I send a polite but firm email or message to check in. I'll remind them of the project's timeline and ask if there's anything they need from me to move forward. I also offer to schedule a quick call if they want to discuss anything in more detail. Clear communication is key here, and I try to keep things professional but also friendly.
Good strategy. It's so important to be proactive in those situations. How do you ensure that you're not overworking yourself, especially with the flexible schedule that freelancing offers?
That's definitely something I've had to learn over time. At first, I used to say yes to every project, but I quickly realized that leads to burnout. Now, I set boundaries, whether it's working specific hours during the day or limiting the number of projects I take on at once. I also make time for personal activities, like exercise or socializing, because it helps me recharge and come back to my work with fresh energy. I also use tools like time tracking apps to keep myself honest about how much time I'm spending on each task, and to avoid the temptation of overworking just to meet a deadline.
That's a very balanced approach. Managing your time effectively is essential. Have you ever had to deal with a difficult client, and how did you resolve the situation?
Yes, unfortunately, that happens sometimes. I've had a couple of situations where clients were either unclear about their expectations or kept changing their minds about what they wanted after the project was already underway. In those cases, I made sure to stay calm and professional, even though it was frustrating. I'd remind the client of the agreed-upon scope and deadlines, and then offer a solution, whether it was an additional round of revisions or an adjusted timeline, but with clear communication about how those changes would impact the final cost. I've also learned to set clearer expectations up front, which helps prevent these situations from escalating.
That's a smart way to handle it. Setting expectations early can really save a lot of hassle later. Do you have any strategies for maintaining long-term relationships with clients?
Yes, absolutely. I think the key to long-term relationships is trust and consistency. I always deliver high-quality work on time, and I make sure to be responsive to client inquiries. But beyond that, I try to keep the relationship personal, whether that means sending a follow-up email after the project is finished to check in, or even sending a small thank you note for their business. I also make a point to stay in touch by sharing updates or useful resources related to their industry. By being genuinely interested in their success, clients are more likely to think of me for future projects.
It's great to see how much effort you put into building lasting relationships. Last question. If you were given a large-scale project with a tight deadline, how would you handle it?
I'd start by breaking the project down into smaller, manageable tasks and creating a detailed timeline. I would prioritize the most critical parts of the project and make sure I understand exactly what the client's priorities are. If the deadline is really tight, I'd also discuss the possibility of bringing in collaborators or freelancers to help with specific parts of the project. I always communicate with the client if I feel like the timeline might be unfeasible and offer solutions. Once the project is underway, I'd stay in constant communication with the client, providing updates and ensuring everything stays on track. My goal would be to deliver the best quality work within the time constraints, while keeping the client involved and informed at every step.
That's a really well thought out plan. Thank you for sharing all of that. It's clear that you have a solid handle on both the technical and business sides of freelancing. We'll be in touch soon about the next steps.
Thank you for your time and for these great questions. I really enjoyed chatting with you and look forward to hearing from you soon.